we must not be weighed down by an insistence on a one-size-fits-all approach, which implies that all countries want the same level of integration. The fact is they don't, and we shouldn't assert that they do. Now, some will claim that this offends a central tenet of the EU's founding philosophy. I would say it merely reflects the reality of the European Union today. 17 members are part of the Eurozone, 10 are not. 26 European countries are members of Schengen, including 4 that are outside the European Union: Switzerland, Norway, Liechtenstein and Iceland. 2 EU countries, Britain and Ireland, have retained their border controls. Some members, like France and Britain, are ready, willing and able to take action in Libya or Mali. Others are uncomfortable with the use of military force. Let us welcome that diversity instead of trying to snuff it out. Let us stop all this talk of the two-speed Europe, of fast lanes and slow lanes, of countries missing trains and buses, and frankly, let us consign the whole weary caravan of transport metaphors, if you like, to a permanent siding. Instead, let us start from this proposition. We are a family of democratic nations, all members of one European Union, whose essential foundation is the single market, rather than the single currency. Those of us outside the euro recognize that those in it are likely to need to make some big institutional changes. And by the same token, the members of the Eurozone should accept that we, and indeed all member states, will have changes that we need to safeguard our interests and to strengthen our democratic legitimacy. And we should be able to make those changes too. Now, some will say this will unravel the principle of the EU and that you can't pick and choose the basis of what your nation needs. But I would argue that far from unraveling the EU, this will in fact bind its members more closely, because such flexible, willing cooperation is a much stronger glue than compulsion from the centre. Let me make a further heretical proposition. The European Treaty commits the member states to lay the foundations of an ever closer union among the peoples of Europe. Now, this has been consistently interpreted as applying not to the peoples, but rather to the states and institutions. And it's been compounded by a European Court of Justice that has consistently supported greater centralization. Now, we understand and respect the right of others to maintain their commitment to this goal. But for Britain, and perhaps for others, it is not the objective. And we would be much more comfortable if the treaty specifically said so, freeing those who want to go further, faster to do so, without being held back by the others. So to those who say, we have no vision for Europe, I say we have. We believe in a flexible union of free member states who share treaties and institutions and pursue together the ideal of cooperation, to represent and promote the values of European civilization in the world, to advance our shared interests by using our collective power to open markets, and to build a strong economic base across the whole of Europe. And we believe in our nations working together to protect the security and diversity of our energy supplies, to tackle climate change and global poverty, to work together against terrorism and organized crime, and to continue to welcome new countries into the European Union. This vision of flexibility and cooperation is not the same as those who want to build an ever closer political union, but it is just as valid. My third principle is that power must be able to flow back to member states, not just away from them. This was promised by European leaders at Laeken a decade ago. It was put in the treaty, but it has never been properly fulfilled. We need to implement this principle properly. So let us use this moment, as the Dutch Prime Minister has recently suggested, to examine thoroughly what the EU as a whole should do and what it should stop doing. Now, in Britain, we've already launched our Balance of Competences review to give us an informed and objective analysis of where the EU helps and where it hampers. And let us not be misled by the fallacy that a deep and workable single market requires everything to be harmonized to hanker after some unattainable and infinitely level playing field. Countries are different. They make different choices. We cannot harmonise everything. For example, it is neither right nor necessary to claim that the integrity of the single market, or indeed full membership of the European Union, requires the working hours of British hospital doctors to be set in Brussels, irrespective of the views of British parliamentarians or practitioners. In the same way, we need to examine whether the balance is right in so many areas where the European Union has legislated, including on the environment, social affairs and crime. Nothing should be off the table. My fourth principle is democratic accountability. We need to have a bigger and more significant role for national parliaments. There is not, in my view, a European demos. It is national parliaments which are and will remain the true source of real democratic legitimacy and accountability in the European Union. It is to the Bundestag that Angela Merkel has to answer. It's through the Greek parliament that Antonis Samaras has to pass his government's austerity measures. And it's to the British Parliament that I must account on the EU budget negotiations, on the safeguarding our place in the single market. Those are the parliaments which instill proper respect, even fear, into national leaders. And we need to recognise that properly in the way that the EU does business. My fifth principle is fairness. Whatever new arrangements are enacted for the Eurozone, they must work fairly for those countries inside it or outside it. That will be of particular importance to Britain. Now, as I've said, we are not going to join the single currency, but there is no overwhelming economic reason why the single currency and the single market should share the same boundary, any more than the single market and Schengen. Our participation in the single market and our ability to help set its rules is the principal reason for our membership of the European Union. So it is of vital interest for us to protect the integrity and fairness of the single market for all of its members. And that is why Britain has been so concerned to promote and defend the single market as the Eurozone crisis starts to rewrite the rules on fiscal coordination and banking union. So these 5 principles provide what I believe is the right approach for the European Union. So now let me turn to what this means for Britain. Today, public disillusionment with the EU is at an all-time high. And there are several reasons for this. People feel that the EU is heading in a direction that they never signed up to. They resent the interference in our national life by what they see as unnecessary rules and regulation. They wonder what the point of it all is. Put simply, many ask, why can't we simply have what we voted to join, a common market? They are angered by some legal judgments made in Europe that impact on life in Britain. Now, of course, some of this antipathy about Europe in general really relates, of course, to the European Court of Human Rights rather than the EU. And Britain is leading European efforts to deal with this. And there is indeed much, much more that needs to be done on this front. But people also feel that the EU is now heading for a level of political integration that is far outside Britain's comfort zone. They see treaty after treaty changing the balance between member states and the EU, and they note they were never given a say. They've had referendums promised, but not delivered. They see what's happened to the euro, and they note that many of our political and business leaders urged Britain to join at the time, and they haven't noticed many expressions of contrition. And they look at the steps that the Eurozone is taking, and they wonder what deeper integration for the Eurozone will mean for a country which is not going to join the euro. The result is that democratic consent for the EU in Britain is now wafer thin. Some people say that pointing this out is irresponsible, that it creates uncertainty for business and puts a question mark over Britain's place in the European Union. But the question mark is already there. Ignoring it is not going to make it go away. In fact, I would argue quite the reverse. Those who refuse to contemplate consulting the British people would, in my view, make our exit more likely. Simply asking the British people to carry on accepting a European settlement over which they've had little choice is a path to ensuring that when the question is finally put, and at some stage it will have to be, it is much more likely that the British people will reject the European Union. That is why I am in favour of having a referendum. I believe in confronting this issue, shaping it, leading the debate, not simply hoping that a difficult situation will go away. Now, some argue that the solution is therefore to hold a straight in-out referendum now. Now, I understand the impatience of wanting to make that choice immediately, but I don't believe that to make a decision at this moment is the right way forward, either for Britain or for Europe as a whole. A vote today between the status quo and leaving would be an entirely false choice. Now, while the EU is in flux, and when we don't know what the future holds and what sort of EU will emerge from this crisis, is not the time to make such a momentous decision about the future of our country. It is wrong to ask people whether to stay or go before we've had a chance to put the relationship right. How can we sensibly answer the question in or out without being able to answer the most basic question? What is it exactly that we're choosing to be in or out of? The European Union that emerges from the Eurozone crisis is going to be a very different body. It will be transformed perhaps beyond recognition by the measures needed to save the Eurozone. We need to allow some time for that to happen and help shape the future of the European Union. So when the choice comes, it will be a real one. A real choice between leaving or being part of a new settlement in which Britain shapes and respects the rules of the single market, but is protected by fair safeguards and free of the spurious regulation that damages Europe's competitiveness. A choice between leaving or being part of a new settlement in which Britain is at the forefront of collective action on issues like foreign policy and trade, and where we leave the door firmly open to new members. A new settlement subject to the democratic legitimacy and accountability of national parliaments, where member states combine in flexible cooperation, respecting national differences and not always trying to eliminate them, and in which we have proved that some powers can in fact be returned to member states. In other words, a settlement which would be entirely in keeping with the mission for an updated European Union I have described today. More flexible, more adaptable, more open, fit for the challenges of the modern age. Now, to those who say, and there are those who say it, that a new settlement can't be negotiated, I would say listen to the views of other parties in other European countries arguing for powers to flow back to European states. And also look too at what we have achieved already. We've ended the obligation for Britain to bail out Eurozone members. We've kept Britain out of the fiscal compact. We've launched a process to return some existing justice and home affairs powers. We've secured protections on banking union and reformed the common fisheries policy. So we're starting to shape the reforms that we need now. Now, some of these things will not require treaty change, but I agree too with what President Barroso and others have said. At some stage in the next few years, the EU will need to agree on treaty change to make the changes needed for the long-term future of the euro, and to entrench the diverse, competitive, democratically accountable Europe that we seek. Now, I believe the best way to do this will be in a new treaty. So today I add my voice to those who are already calling for this. Now, my strong preference is to enact these changes for the entire European Union, not just for Britain. But if there is no appetite for a new treaty for us, and if there is no appetite for a new treaty for us, or for us all, then of course Britain would be ready to address the changes we need in a negotiation with our European partners. So the next Conservative manifesto in 2015 will ask for a mandate from the British people for a Conservative government to negotiate a new settlement with our European partners in the next Parliament. It will be a relationship with the single market at its heart. And when we have negotiated that new settlement, we will give the British people a referendum with a very simple in or out choice. to stay in the European Union